mentally, I'm a recovered alcoholic. And it's so nice to be with you. I want to thank the group, Becky in particular, for inviting me to be here and share my life and my journey with you and what God has done in my life. My sober date is December, and anyone that has anything to do with putting on this event, I know that it's a very arduous task, and you did such a lovely job, and appreciate all the speakers that came before me. You filled my spirit, and I'll take you home with me. I really appreciate that. I was looking for the new girl. I don't see her here, but I wanted to welcome her into the family of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sober date is December 26th, 2001, and for that I am eternally grateful. I did not stop drinking on that day. God saw fit to separate me from alcohol. And I had tried to stop many times before. And I could stop for a little bit, but I always started again. And my delusional thinking, which I did not know that I had at the time, or my insanity, if you will, told me that this time it was going to be different. And I would try numerous times, many, many times, the experiment of that first drink. And each failure and each attempt would turn out to be worse than the last. And our textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous brings us to that conclusion as we walk through the pages of Alcoholics Anonymous and find out who we are and what we are in relationship to alcoholism. Today I know that I could never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And that includes medical marijuana and a bunch of other things that my mind might tell me that I can do. My sponsor used to tell me anything from the neck up that changes me. So that's it, pretty much everything. You know. So I'm going to talk about other stuff other than substances that can treat our alcoholism. As I learned over the years that it's not only about substances, it can be people, it can be things, it can be other stuff that we or I worshipped unbeknownst to me. So I do want to start off with, and I always start off with saying that God is good all the time, even when I don't think so. And there's certain groups that I have been invited to where they had asked, my late husband, he died 2.5 years ago. We were together for 15 years doing the deal. He caught brain cancer. And it was quick, thank you for God's grace, but when they would ask us, like, don't share about God here. It's like, well, that's the only brand of AA that I have, right? This is the power that brought me back from the gates of hell. So you might have an adverse reaction to God. I doubt it with this group of people, but there'll be another speaker at your next meeting. So I am going to, God will be the centerpiece of my talk. I had a little bit of, I wouldn't say anxiety, but I'm not in my usual form in that I'm one that I forgot my big book. I can't believe I forgot my big book. I didn't pack it. And no notes. So, and I had nothing. Nothing would come. And what I heard this morning when I was talking with God out on the patio was, my grace is sufficient for you. And, you know, I know that's true. You know, God does not call the equipped, He equips the called. And so I'm really counting on Him to come through. And it's not my story, it's His story. So I want to walk you back to 1999, where I was really dead behind my eyes. I just, there was nothing going on inside. I was a shell of a woman, and I really wanted to stop drinking. I had a desperate desire to stop drinking, and yet I was drinking against my will. Somehow, some way, I was led to a meeting, and no, sorry, I wasn't led to a meeting in 99. There were a few people in my life that were helping me to stop drinking. And of course, you know, the hiding of the bottles and, you know, the lying and all the stuff that goes with alcoholism. You know, I had these standard lines. If someone that I was living with would ask if I had drank, you know, have you drank anything? And my standard line was, I only had two, or are you crazy? That was what I would always say. But there were so many people that God had placed in my path that loved me, and I couldn't experience it. I really had no power to give or receive love. And so, the way I came to you all actually was 2001, but I had been exposed in 1999, so there's a little bit of a gap there. And during that gap time, the person that I was living with was a person that was religious and came from a very big Italian family, and there were a lot of like priests and just all that kind of stuff going on. It was a very good family. I wasn't used to that. I didn't grow up with that. And I was going to church, and I remember still reeking of the alcohol during that time from 1999 to 2001. And as we would file into the church, first of all, I felt like the doors were gonna just like burn on fire, that I would walk through them. But, you know, getting through there and getting into the pew, I would kneel down before the ceremonies would go on, and I would say to God, please, God, I don't want to drink. I really don't want to drink. Please help me to stop drinking. And I would hear a little tiny voice on the other side saying, why are you asking God? You know you're going to go home and drink. And the reason I share that is because I had the assumption that the devil didn't go to church. And that's not true. Right? So I had the idea, you know, we have our ideas about God, but we also have the ideas about the lower power and the lower energy and the lower vibration, and that he wears a red suit and a pitchfork. Well, that's not true. It comes in many forms, and my alcoholism comes in many forms. And so I heard that, and I believed it, because I had always been told growing up that I was a liar and no good for nothing. And my story, I'm born in 1960, and I have two siblings that were older, and my dad left when I was 2. Player type guy. And so my mom had 3 children at the age of 22 and untreated bipolar. And it's a very scary environment to grow up in because you never knew what you were going to get. And I could say that we were beaten on a regular. I used to talk about batch chains and knives, and that's inside the house, wasn't? And that's really not being funny. That's true. And my mother was very, very beautiful, and she worked shift work, bartender slash waitress. She became a hairdresser, so she was rarely home. And my sister, who was 4.5 years older than me, became the mother figure. So me and my older brother pretty much ran. We did what we wanted to. And in the 60s, I was running around New York with no supervision, and unbeknownst to me, untreated alcoholism. So I did what I liked when I liked. If you weren't my mother or father, I wasn't going to listen. Very defiant. It's an earmarking of an alcoholic. I picked up the habit of stealing. I now know through the inventory that I did that because I wasn't enough. I couldn't show up as enough. We were beaten terribly, taken to hospital many times, and my mother had many boyfriends in and out, and one of her boyfriends at the age of 3 took me and put me in a hot tub of water and left me to die. I had 3rd-degree burns on my feet, and he said he was going to wash the Puerto Rican out of me. And there was other, much more abuse, knives and things like that, not only to me, my siblings also, but it's the story that I'm telling. And, you know, there were men in and out of that, hanging me from closets and being beaten. We were passed along to, throughout my young childhood, most of the adults were really crazy. Like, it wasn't like my worldview was not very, it was scary. And I ran away from home when I was 16, and I got pregnant with my first love. It was the first time I'd ever been pregnant, and I remember sharing this one time at a group, and after, when people come by to thank you, a man said to me, thank you for choosing life. And I didn't really understand what that was. It was really early sobriety, and I didn't really know about like having an abortion and what the implications were now moving forward, spiritually speaking. And I know that me making that decision to keep my child, who is now 48 and not an alcoholic and very well-centered, Bob Darrell talked about that. It's like they just handle stuff good, But that God's grace, there's so much grace in my story. And I had him when I was 16, and his father stepped out on me, and I raised him until he was 7. But the reason that I'm sharing these little high points in my life is not to bring you into a atmosphere of sorrow, but to really walk you through my mind process and to let you understand what was driving the bus behind my alcoholism and why I believed that I drank. Because I didn't know what alcoholism was until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. And so after he stepped out on me, I never used drugs or anything. My son's father was a musician, and so were his 3 brothers. And we're in the 70s, we're in New York, and there's a lot of gig stuff going on, and there's a lot of partying, but I never participated in that. God's grace. And so my son was born healthy, 9 pounds, 9 ounces, and within 3 months, I knew I had to leave. It wasn't about my life, it was about my son's life. But during that time period, I was a runaway, and I was a shut-in, because I was afraid my mother was going to come and get me, and if she got me, I had been gone. And so I never had prenatal care, any of that. I was rushed to the hospital, had an emergency C-section, and my child was born. So after he stepped down on me within 3 months, I started to go down to the welfare office so that I could provide for my child. And the reason that's so significant for me was we were brought up poor. We were considered poor. We had food stamps, and I had a lot of shame because we had a neighborhood that had lots and lots. It was thriving with children, predominantly Italian, Irish, and it was in a borough called Astoria, Queens in New York. And they all had mothers and fathers, and I didn't. My mom was never home, and she was the crazy lady on the house and on the block, and we'd be whipped down the block, and people would see that. So I always had a lot of shame on me. And during those beatings, I was told that I was stupid and no good, and I was just like my father. And so that my identity was really stolen from me in that way. So fast forward, I leave the baby's father, and when I get that apartment, I start to use alcohol to quiet the loneliness within my soul. I always had an orphan heart because I didn't have a mother and father. As far as I saw, I never had a conversation with my mother. It was a dictatorship, roadblock, or steamroll. That's it. That's the way we would address. We were not allowed to cry. We were denied any kind of emotion. So I learned so I umbrellaed everything under sadness when I got here, and I learned about disappointment and just other emotions that are available and I have access to within me as a human being. And so my alcoholism really took off. I ended up getting in with bikers and that kind of stuff. Now I lived the quintessential double life that the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about. And when I was listening to Christina's story, it was really, I started to cry, just knowing that some of the things that our children have to experience because of the curse of the generations, and not understanding that we have an illness, through ignorance, I would say. And I would say that her story is not my story in that my son's Nana, his great-grandmother, was very prevalent in my son's life. And I had just met her when she was 76. And so she really did a lot of caregiving, and we bartered. She had a candy store / coffee shop and sold newspapers. So she would watch my son, and I would work part-time in Manhattan, but I stayed there while my drinking took off. And I would sleep with people I would not even want to go to lunch with. I'd be drinking, I went to the disco, the punk rock scene, all of that. I'm a true, real alcoholic. That was the thing that really, that's my drug of no choice. But anything that you would give me, I would take it and then say, what's it gonna do to me? Because I really needed to not be me. And thank God for those angels that God placed along the way of my path, that my son didn't see a lot of the stuff that he might have seen in my later addiction. Because there comes a time where the double life just starts to all melt into one. And so my alcoholism took off, and I didn't know what that was. And I got into a marriage, a 14-year marriage. I took on, I'll finish this piece with that. Got into a marriage. I took his daughter in, and I raised his daughter and my son. I really wanted a family. I was trying. I was 22 years old, got married, and had 2 children. It was like instant mashed potatoes, right? And I fared pretty good for the first portion. But my first husband, he was an athlete, not quite pro, semi-pro, and a lot of the bars sponsored us, and we would go out, after the games, we'd go back to the bars that sponsored us, and that's where it really took off, and we started getting into other substances, and my life took on a different trajectory. And prior to meeting him, I remember thinking, at least drinking, I was getting brownouts, blackouts. I think I was the potential alcoholic at that time. Had I gotten help then, I would have saved myself a lot of years of suffering. In our textbook on page 279, which there's actually no page number, talks about that. They nearly stopped in time. There were 17 young ones that came to Alcoholics Anonymous when it was in its fledglings, when it was, its adolescent period. And they saw the bottom come up, and they didn't go on to the bitter end like many of us do. I needed to look death in the eye. And that was just where my story took me. And so prior to meeting my husband, I realized, I'm getting into trouble. I was 21, and I went to jewelry design school, and I became a jewelry designer. I really loved doing that. I was abstinent that whole time, and the textbook talks about that. Some of us can stay stopped for a year, maybe a little bit more. And I did that, and I thrived in that. And just before I was about to break into the industry, if you will, I met my first husband. And because he was the athlete, and we started going back to the bars, and my alcoholism, not unbeknownst to me, that if I take a drink, that drink demands 2 more drinks, and those demand 4 more. And so I didn't know about the allergy and the obsession. So I tell you all of those stories of the early parts of my story to tell you is that I thought that's why I drank. If you had the mother that I had, and a father that abandoned you like yesterday's garbage, you would drink too. Your first love leaves you when you're 6 months pregnant, and you have no education and no money, and now you have to go down to welfare and grovel. I only went to the 7th grade. I had 0 education at that time. And, this was the narrative that I walked around with. And those were the reasons that I thought I drank the way I drank and did the things the way I did the things that I did. It was always my mother's fault or something out there's fault. And that would drive the bus for a very long time until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and going through the inventories and seeing who I really was. Because I had built this false self that my ego can just keep rebuilding itself and justifying anything away and just passing the buck. I often ask some of the, and I had to ask this question to myself, and when I asked it to myself, it was life-changing. And so I ask it to some of the women that I get the opportunity to minister to. And I ask them, when is the time? What age is the time that we take responsibility for our life? When do we put that old story down and stop living from there? And for me, it was 39. And of course, it would take me some time to heal in those areas, but I thought I had this big L on my head, 39. You have a child or children, because I had a stepdaughter, gone through marriages, and I feel like it was like one of those things where, my first husband and I, we would go on vacation once a year to these tropical islands, and back then, you'd have to put the film in and get the pictures back. And I'd look at them and I'd be like, wow, it looks like I really had fun. Like, because I was not there. I just wasn't there, because it was me on me and I couldn't do you. Because there was a big narrative in my head and it wasn't nice. It was brutal. And I couldn't shut the voices down. And that was the reason that I was picking up the alcohol, because I need ease and comfort. Alcoholics, men and women, drink essentially because they like the experience produced by alcohol. And that experience is ease and comfort. I don't want to be uncomfortable, not even for a minute, right? I have a low tolerance for that. Well, now I do, I didn't then. And I'm kind of going to go all over the place with this until it intertwines in that there was always that, it felt like there was like a really loud air conditioner running all the time. And I got used to that, with all that stuff in the background. Your mother doesn't love you, look what happened to you, your father just left you, you're unlovable, you're never going to get this right, look at all the mistakes, you got pregnant at such an early age, you didn't get married, unwedded mother. I'm Spanish and Italian, and I was raised in an Italian family, which was very Catholic and very Italian. So to be pregnant at 16 and not be married, it wasn't a good situation. So it was that, and so I had all of that, these old belief systems, that this old covenant that was passed down to me. And my mind, the God of my understanding, had his eyebrow raised and his finger pointing down, and he was going to get me. I deserved everything that I got. Later in sobriety, when I go through, the We Agnostic chapter with my sponsor, and I start to poke holes at, what's my belief system? Why do I believe this about God? Who is God? Not what does God do? Who is God? And that changed everything for me, to find out who he was. That implies an intimate relationship with the God of my understanding. And I started to realize, as I went through We Agnostic, that the God of my understanding was becoming a little bit more patient and a little bit more kind and compassionate. And there was one day when I was praying, and they were very fundamental prayers at that time, because I was just getting in the relationship with God. But I had these mini awakenings along the way through the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous and what the Holy Spirit was doing in me through those steps. And I was like, oh, he's getting more patient and compassionate, and I'm getting more patient and compassionate. So there's like a direct relationship there between us, and I was coming to believe of this God of my not understanding. And for me, there was a line in We Agnostic that talks about God being approachable, right? What are God's terms? Like, how do I get to this God? Because I saw people, the elders or the old-timers, with this spiritual aura about them, and I thought it was way out of reach for me, right? There's no way that God would want anything to do with me. And his terms are, when we are willing and honest enough to try, then we can get into the relationship. And that was very appealing to me, because again, the covenant that my mother had given me, I thought that the guys with those hats, the bishops and the priests, I thought that that was reserved for them, that they could speak to God directly, that I couldn't, that I did not have the right to do that. And as I continue to talk to God, which is prayer, and really open my heart to listen. The word listen, if you scramble it up, it becomes silent. It spells the word silent. And there's a lot of power in silence. I choked up on that one because step 11 is just so rich with God's power and grace. In step 11, it talks about one where doubtful or emotional. I can't think of the word right now. Somebody give me an 11-step line. It pause when doubtful or agitated. So if I'm agitated, that means my emotions are running the show. And if I'm doubtful, that means my mind is running the show. So it tells us to pause. There's power in that pause. It might look like I'm doing nothing. That pause has saved my bacon many a time. It's much like a duck. You see the duck but underneath, there's a lot of action going. And that's really what's going on in my spirit, because now I have connected to the power that I accessed in step 2. Because step 2 tells me, as soon as I'm willing and honest enough to try and say that there might be a God, then you don't even have to believe in a God, just that there might be a power greater than yourself, He will come. And God is faithful. I now know, and as I went through We Agnostic, I could see that God was with me in the back, in the dark, in the corner. He was with me in all that circumstance. I couldn't see it then, because I wasn't conscious. That's the difference between now and then. It's always there, but I wasn't conscious of it. And this is what we talk about, the spiritual awakening via the 12 steps, right? And if you're around long enough, you know that those numbers fall off the shade, and it becomes watercolors, and it's a way of life, and it's the way we be. But it really starts here, because step 1 does not tell me that I can't drink. Step 1 tells me I'm going to drink. So that's the problem. The solution is step 2, if we care to reach out. I was doing a Bible study about 3 or 4 months ago to a group of women in the Grace House. And one of the girls was new to the study, just asking lots of questions, which I adore, because that shows me you're interested. And she was like, you mean to tell me like there's billions of people on the planet, and why doesn't everybody, have God? You ever say something and something comes out of your mouth and you're like, who said that? This is one of those moments. And I said, well, everyone's invited. Everyone is invited. And this is what we call free will. That's what separates us from the animals. Not I took my will back, God does not want your will. We're here to align our will with God's will. So what does that mean? Because that was always like a question in my head, like, what is how? And they say, just what do they mean by that in the textbook? Just how and what do they mean by that? Well, the first requirement is that any life, we have to understand that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. That includes the normal people, but for us, we're going to die. So I've got the access to this power, and I should use it. And, that second step is really bringing us to a place, my hope starts to mature into faith in the third step. That principle should be in action. And faith is like believing in something you really don't see. It's much like jumping off a mountain, free fall. I don't know what's on the bottom of it, And we have to really try to trust our God that way, which is not easy for any human, but particularly us defiant ones. Right? And so step 3 invites us for me, it invited me to take that armor. Because I really thought I had to manage this thing. I thought I had to, if I could only rest, pull, and force the things that I thought I needed out of this life, and then I'll be okay. And it always blew up. So, how would I come to this conclusion that my life is, well, first of all, what is a success? My idea of what a success would be used to be a nice house, somebody that loves me, nice car, money in the bank, nice jewelry, looking good. That used to be what my ideal looked like. And God really showed me in a big way that no, that's not what it is. I had all of that when I arrived on December 26, 2001 here. I had a man, that Italian man, beautiful family, they adored me, and yet I was 80 pounds, I had yellow skin and an inverted stomach and could not stop drinking. I was drinking out of a walk-in closet. All of that stuff was accessible to me. And that person loved me enough. He really was a safe place for me. He wasn't my forever, but he helped me to get into Alcoholics Anonymous. He was the vehicle that God had used. But I could see in the material world that it was nothing out there was going to fix what was in here. I understood that through my experience. And so seeing that and reading the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous, they lined up. Because I could have had the best sponsor in the world, and they could have told me all of that. But if I don't feel it experientially, and I don't know it in my heart, it's not really going to take root. And I'm going to think that I have another plan. And my first step will not be a first step experience. Because I had many first step experiences out there, but I didn't have a second step in place. There's two reasons that people relapse and leave. One is they don't know the problem, and the second is they don't know the solution. So I'm very grateful that my sponsor, Nancy, she's no longer with us, but she was a woman armed with the facts about herself. She had had a spiritual awakening, and she cared enough to pass it along to me. I know what you men feel like going up to a woman and asking them on a date, because that's what it felt like when I was like not even, I think I was like 2 months dry. Because I had relapsed a couple of times before December 26th. I had 3 one-day slips. And the only thing I heard during that 90 days was, get a sponsor. And this is what I heard, they probably didn't say it. If you do those steps, you're going to be okay. And that's all I ever wanted to be. And do a 90 and 90. Now, the 90 and 90 is not in the textbook, but it sure was a good idea for me. The only one thing I would caution is that I believed that if I didn't do all of the 90 and 90 in a row, that I was going to relapse. Because there was one day that I couldn't, and I got so fearful. And I'm very grateful that I didn't. But it was during that 90 and 90 that I met Nancy. And I waited, she was facilitating a big book study. I really liked what she had. I could see in her eyes, I didn't know it then, but I know it now, it was God. And she was able to, when the meeting broke up, I was raised, you line up and you say thank you to the speaker. And she was talking to people and engaging. I couldn't do that, not without booze. My first, I want to say 8, 9 months, I was a floor looker. I go right to the back. And it was still me on me. I just so self-centered. I couldn't really hear what was going on in the meeting. It took over time with Nancy helping me and being my guide. I didn't want to get a sponsor, and that's why I relapsed, one of the reasons I relapsed. Because in my mind, I thought that a sponsor was going to tell me what to do. And that's not what's going on here. They can guide you in that way, but it's really a sharing partner and to help you and to navigate not only the steps, but also AA as a whole. You know, we have a triangle and we must be in all 3 sides of that triangle or it will collapse. And so I approached her after the meeting and I asked her to sponsor me, and she gave me her most precious commodity, which was her time. And we went through the pages of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was there that I found out the truth about who I was and what I was. If someone could really give me like a time, because I don't really know how much I have to talk, how much time I have left.
10:22.
How much time do I have left?
You got like 20 seconds.
Awesome. Okay. So we went on this journey together. There is no other relationship like the relationship from sponsee to sponsor. It is just something so amazing. And so this third step, I understood that I was embarking and going through this archway. And there's a keystone, and that keystone, Bill Wilson likes to use construction as analogies to do this building block. And what we're building is a spiritual house within ourselves. The church is in your heart. We share the building together because it's communal, but the real happening and the real church is within. And that's what Bill Wilson is building with these foundation stones, the cornerstone, which is God. So we have a foundation, then we have the cornerstone, which is the first stone in a building. And many of you might have passed a building and you see like built in 1877, that's a cornerstone. And I like to ask some of the people that I work with, when was your cornerstone built? Can you take me back to a time where, minus the big book, minus the sponsor, where you really had an experience with a God that you didn't understand? Mine was in 1999. I had cried out to God from the depths of my soul, please help me. It was fleeting, but I had this suspicion, and same as Bill, that everything was going to be all right. I didn't know what that meant. And subsequently I drank again. I had those one-day slips, but I was led to AA. Trust me, I was not the girl going to AA. I was the biker chick with the leather jacket, the ponytail, and I got it. Don't need no sponsor. Got it. Right? But on the opposite side of that, I don't fit in. Right? The big ego, low self-esteem. And that can happen like in 2 minutes. I could be all that and then I'm nothing. Like in 2 seconds. Because all the action's happening up here. Because my disease, for the alcoholic, it centers in his mind. The disease centers in his mind. And so it would be very important that I have God and another human being to align my will. Because I need that. Much like a car. You start driving that car and you beat it up long enough, it's going to start steering off course. And you're going to take it to the shop, or perhaps, in my case, to the people that built it, because they know the car. And they're going to make a wheel adjustment, and it's going to be aligned properly, and you're going to get to where you need to be going. Right? And so I know that I need that. I need that today. Still. I have a different sponsor, and I would never go sponsorless, just because. I wouldn't recommend it to my girls. I don't ask the girls, I shouldn't say my girls, the girls that I get to be with. I wouldn't ask them to do something that I'm not doing, because that would be hypocritical. And so I do more now for my sobriety than I've done in the early parts of my sobriety. The more awake you become, the more aware you are of your deformities. Right? And so sometimes, it can be challenging to let go still of things that I think I need. And that's, the reason that I need my God. I need him so much. And so I understood that. So we have this keystone. And the book tells us that we're about to walk through an archway. And since I was raised in Catholicism, what we do in Catholicism in the mass ceremony is the priest is up here and there's an altar there. And he does the whole ceremony and we have the parishioners in the pews. And then at some point we come up to receive the body of Christ, or God if you will. AA is much like that. We must come to the altar and we must receive that. We must take that into ourselves. And this keystone is the thing. The keystone is the understanding that holds that archway together. That I am now, 1 and 2, they were just decisions. I understand my relationship to alcohol and drugs. I understand my relationship to a God of my understanding, even though it's fundamental. He's God and I'm not, is good enough. My late husband used to say, you can borrow my God. And his God's name was Gus, guy upstairs. And if you didn't like that one, it would be Sam, sure ain't me. So you could use those for a beginning. And, I understood that, and with that understanding, and with that openness of heart and mind, because that's what the text spends 44 pages. I think it's pretty important. It's the bulk of our directions and warnings and promises is that you're going to make this decision wholeheartedly and wholeheartedly. Yes, I'm going to give my life, my thoughts and my actions over to the care of this God. I'm not going to run the show anymore because I can see what happens when I do. And then in the text, as we're approaching the fourth step, it tells us what the problem is. Oh no, Bob talked about it. Corine is the problem. Oh, I didn't want to hear it. Selfish, self-seeking, self-delusional. A delusion is a break from reality, which means you cannot see the truth. There's no denial in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a delusion. It's that I believe my own lie, which makes it all the more real. That's why they say fancy it or real, because I can believe that. I think Christina alluded to that in her talk. So self-delusion is part of my illness. That's why I need another human being to wait a minute, I thought you said this. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? So I have that. Not only that, to add salt to the wound, it's driven by 100 forms of fear, not one form, 100. So the fear takes on new masks. Fear doesn't always look like fear. I could look angry. I could look like I could start slamming things around, stools in the hotel room. It could look like I'm angry. No, I'm really scared. It's fear that's driving it. I had a little bit of that, not because of the talk. I have some personal stuff going on. I'm working through it with God. And I sat out on the patio in my conversations to God. With God, I identified that, all right, it's fear. I did not do the fear prayer. God, please remove this fear and have me be what you would want me to be, not do. I did not say that. I said, God, why am I afraid? What is causing this fear? And I got my answer. And it's there that I could do my work with God. And it's through these inventories, because I have to understand that I'm selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and fearful. It's never anybody out there. Because I'm the problem. Always, I didn't like that. Because the next sentence on page 62 is, so we think our problems of our own making. And it was screaming in my head last night. I could barely sleep. Because you created this. Nobody else. The good news is that we have other steps to allow God to help us do our mistakes. Doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. I made a mistake. I'm 22 years in this thing. My first 5 was a hot mess. It really was. I didn't know. I went through the steps. I had a spiritual awakening, but I didn't know I had to apply those steps. So I thought, I had a spiritual awakening, and I got relief, not recovery. It was not good. At 6 years sober, I'm a motorcycle person. I lost control of my bike. I just came out of a Sunday morning meeting, not a cloud on the horizon, sunny, wasn't traffic, nothing. It was my unfortunate the pavement wasn't right, and ultimately I lost my leg in that accident. I was a year and a half sober, and I should say in sobriety, because I was not practicing the steps. The only thing that was happening was my breath smelled better. And I ended up, and during that time, I ended up going into the double life again. I was living with that Italian man, beautiful family, someone that loved me, was in my corner rooting for me. And I ended up meeting someone in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was in a 9-year relationship in my neighborhood, but in a 6-year relationship with someone in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not proud to say that. I don't have the shame behind it because I'm past that. I wouldn't do that. I'm not that person I was then. And I hope that I can speak to somebody that is in the audience. That was my prayer today. Because I was addicted to that man. And that man, I picked up the man. I put down the bottle and I picked up the man. And he was treating my alcoholism. And there was many things that was going on during that time. You know, I used to equate sex to, more sex means more love. And that's not true, right? I find out as I get sober and really go through the steps and do the true inventory. And the first inventory was great, and it took me where I needed to go, and I had to experience all that. So I lose my leg, and of course there's mind, body, and spirit. There's a whole lot of recovery that had to go in there, and through the grace of God, I did not relapse. I was on heavy morphine. I was in the hospital for 3 months there. And the same as Bob's story is, I said, please, I didn't know anything about detoxing, because I was an alcoholic. I didn't know about detoxing drugs. And when I asked him to take me off it, I detoxed in the hospital, and I'm very grateful for that. And so I went on this journey with that. But during that time, the two met in the hospital, and I was asked to leave that house, and I became homeless. I didn't even have a prosthetic yet, because you can't be fitted until you're like 6 months. There's a healing piece that your body has to do. And I was back in the welfare office. And I was homeless for about 3 months. And during that time, it was there that I met the God of my understanding. And I can tell you that, you know, I was a surrendered woman. I was just like, where are we going? And me and Holy Spirit were like, he was my ride or die, and you know, I now today he's my silent partner. I really don't do anything without God. And I choose to call Holy Spirit. I just need to press in, and all the answers are there. Not always easy, not always fast, but they're there. And so with about 3 months in, I got a 1-bedroom apartment, and during that time, it was there that I courted the God of my understanding. And I went through the steps again. My sister, I had the fortunate experience. My sister, even though she's 4.5 years older than me, she was sticking needles in her arm and living in the streets of New York for 4 long, cold winters. And she arrived at my mother's doorstep, and I 12-stepped her. And I got her hooked up into AA. She's thriving. She's 19 years old. Thank you, God. Because there's not only restoration individually, but there's families that get restored. And I watched her have a spiritual experience the day that I picked her up to take her in. They medicated her, but they weaned her. Her and her God, they weaned her off. There's most people like that in our environment that stay on methadone, and it's just like a methadone. She didn't do that, because she got connected to you guys. I would pray with her over the phone, because I lived 40 minutes away from her every morning, and I was able to put her hand in the hand of God. And she got connected to a women's group, and we started to walk the journey together also. But during that time, not having my leg and being in that apartment, I started to see my sister. She picked up a sponsor, and she told me it was a man sponsor. And we were in and around our area, it's like the men with the men and the women with the women. Well, that's not really in our literature. Is it a good idea if you have lust issues? Yes. Right? And my sister got a man sponsor, and I watched her thrive. And I was going through a hard time trying to let go of that obsession. And even though you still, even though you go through the steps, the old man is still in there. And that's what step 6 and 7 is about. Just keep going back to God and repenting, turning from what you know that God doesn't want you to do. And this is where the work begins. And step 6 and 7 is the backbone of our sobriety, of my sobriety. What am I releasing to God? Because I clearly knew that God didn't want me in that relationship. And so while I was doing that, I knew I needed a new experience. And I heard God's audio voice loud like the Wizard of Oz in that apartment. Woke me out of a dead sleep. I sprung up and I heard him say, because I was telling that guy, to go through the steps again. And I heard God say to me, who are you to tell someone to go through the steps? Why don't you try going through them yourself? And I spoke to it in the dark. I said, but who? And I started rummaging through the people. It was like a movie. And the thing that came to my mind was this one woman, can't remember her name right now. She had something I was looking that I thought was very appealing. And I remembered my sister, and I saw her change in like such a short amount of time. And I said, maybe I'll call her and ask her if she would mind if I use her sponsor. And I did. And so her sponsor, we had a couple of phone conversations, and he ended up coming to my apartment, and we went through the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous together. And I was in love with Jesus at the time, and I did have God, and that is my God. This person had God. And so I introduced him to Jesus. They're all one and the same, and he introduced me to God. And through that process of working through the steps, what ended up happening was I fell in love with the God within him, and he fell in love with the God within me. And ultimately, we ended up getting married. We had a 14-year, beautiful, beautiful marriage. With a lot of respect, we got to start a lot of groups back up in New York, in and around Long Island, and sponsored many, many people. We had lots of traffic in our house, which we loved. It was our life's work. And we loved God together, and we did inventories, and we did everything that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous asks us to do, and we were blessed for it. It was the best 15, 14 years of my life, looking back on it, you know, and so after going through those steps with Paul, and again, another layer, you know, we're not one-dimensional. There's layers and layers underneath these steps. It's not a one and done. And there's layers and layers to our personalities. You know, and I pray God that I always remain teachable and humble. I'm never afraid to be transparent to the girls that I get to be with. I made so many mistakes since my husband passed. And I didn't grieve his death. And how much time do I have? Do you know, 10 minutes? Just want to share the goodness of God. So we're going along. We just got back from a Christian rock concert with a couple of our sponsees. We saw Mercy Me, and I can't remember the other people that the lineup was, but driving back, 3 months prior, my husband was like a little erratic, and I wasn't sure, and I was talking to my sponsor. I was doing inventory. I was like, it looks like untreated alcoholism, and I don't know what's going on with this, and couldn't quite pinpoint it, but it wasn't him. And that night, we came home, and the short end is that I went in one way, and he went in the other, and he fell, and he busted his face wide open, and he wouldn't go to the hospital, but subsequently, he did say yes, and I took him for a brain scan, and we learned that he had brain cancer. That's what was going on all the time. And they kept him in the hospital for a week, and God I was just in this beautiful protection of God. I can't even explain. Well, it was a spiritual experience for 55 days. Because there wasn't I was just doing what was in front of me, and if I thought of something I needed, it was there. And all of the AA. I mean, my patio was always full. We had meetings on my patio, but all of the kids, we called them our kids, they were there, they showed up. Everyone has different talents, so this one was doing that one was doing this, and I chose palliative care. I wasn't gonna have my husband do radiation. It was 4th stage, and I took him home, and my house is very airy. We opened everything up, and people from all over the United States, because we had done lots of service and many conventions along the way, and we collected a lot of new friends, and we called them heart friends, and they flew in to come see my husband and be with him bedside. He had his music in the house. My pastor came and read Bible verses, and I got to bathe him every morning at 5:30 and change him and put cream on him and just care for him. And it wasn't sad. I got to walk my husband home. And everything that we found in Alcoholics Anonymous and the God of our understanding, the God that he had, the God that I had, and the God that was shared, showed up in a mighty way. And I walked him home. You know, he had his last breath, and he was peaceful, you know. And I'll be forever grateful. There's no sadness. I mean, I miss him, but I know he's dancing. He's in it. Really, I told him I'll catch up with you, because I know my God. It's not that I believe in God. I know my God. I walk with God. I know who he is. And it's through the 11th step and the 10th step that I get to experience that. You know, because my ego wants to say that you're different, and I see more of the differences than the similarities. You know, and I have to do the writing on that and I have to get clear. And the only way that I can do that is really just revisiting. You know, step 10 is all the other steps rolled up into one. It's all of that stuff that I learned put into practice for the rest of my life. It's the prescription for alcoholism. And I don't know about any of you, but I know back in the day when I used to get sick, I'd go to the doctor begrudgingly, but I'd get the medication that would get me well. And halfway through, I'd be like, oh, I feel good. I don't need the rest of that. And what always happens? Relapse. Right? And Alcoholics Anonymous is much like that. Take the full prescription as directed. Because the great physician knows the healing that we need. I don't. And so it would always go back to God. He is not a resource. He is the source. There's many resources out there. And when you're done with that, go to God. I want to do a little reading and then I'll close. This morning when I went to open, no, I didn't pack anything, but this was in there. And this is what I got to see when I opened my book. And it says, can God help me? Because I was in that place, right? And of course the resounding answer was yes. And it's a prayer choice and prayer conflict is the name of the passage. And I'm going to read a little chapter in verse 1. Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. When thou prayest, enter into the closet, and when thou hast shut the door, pray to thy Father, which is in secret. The closet is your heart, or the recesses of your mind, whichever you prefer. Jesus did not say, dream about the Father in secret, but pray to thy Father in secret. Pray is an effort of will. That is the proper use of your will. To pray is being willful, but in the right way. After we have entered our secret place and have shut the door, the most difficult thing to do is to pray. We cannot get our minds into working order, and the first thing that conflicts is wandering thoughts. The great battle in private prayer is the overcoming of mental wool gathering. When we have to discipline our minds and concentrate on willful prayer. We must have a selected place for prayer, and when we get there, the plague of flies begins. This must be done, and that must be done. Shut the door. A secret silence means to shut the door deliberately and emotionally and remember God. God is in secret, and he sees us from a secret place. He does not see us as other people see us, or as we see ourselves. When we live in the secret place, it becomes impossible for us to doubt God. We become more sure of him than of anything else. Your Father says, in secret and nowhere else. Enter the secret place, and right in the center of the common round, you find God there all the time. Get into the habit of dealing with God about everything. Unless the first waking moment of the day, you learn the flying the door wide back and let God in, you will work on the wrong level all day. You must open the door for God and shut the door for flies. But swing the door wide open and pray to your Father in secret, and every public thing will be stamped with the presence of God. Thank you for letting me share.
That was an amazing lead, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm glad you were here. It's nice to meet you. So we will join hands and close with the Lord's Prayer and.
Let's go around.
So, who gave us another amazing Clifty conference? Our God, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.